my in-laws have. My father-in-law, some years ago, actually climbed this. The way they do it with tourists is you get up like at 2 in the morning, and you start your climb, and by the time you reach the top, that's about the time of the sunrise. And so it's kind of a dramatic effect, but it's a little bit of a hike. So you better be in shape, for that. So that's just the tourist aspect and the physical aspect of that. But nonetheless, it was a mountain. If not this side, it was a mountain that probably was very similar to this, that Moses went up and waited for the Lord, and then God showed him his plan. So in doing that, what was that plan? So go with me now to chapter 25. It says in verse 8, it says, "And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them." Verse 9, "According to all that I show thee, after the pattern of the tabernacle, and the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so shall ye make it." And again, we actually, a couple weeks ago, we kind of delved just in this topic about the dwelling place of God. In verse 8 it says, "And let them make me a sanctuary," or a sacred space, "that I may dwell among them." And the Hebrew word for among is a Hebrew called betucham. Betucham literally means I will dwell in them. It's a very intimate word. And so it's not just dwell among them, I'm dwelling literally in them is the idea. You think of this. Today, our bodies are, where's the temple today? It's us. It's us. Our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit dwells not among us, dwells in us. And so it's really very similar concept that we have right here. And so the tabernacle is very important. So within that, here's something really interesting that might surprise you. Let's compare one thing. So let's talk about the creation account, for example, the creation of the world and of mankind. There's only 2 chapters in the Bible that deal with that. I mean, there's other verses throughout the Bible mentioned, but there's 2 chapters, Genesis 1 and 2, that deal with the creation of the world and mankind. However, it's interesting, there are, can you believe it, how many chapters are devoted to the description of the tabernacle and its related ministries? 50. 50 chapters. Throughout Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, in Hebrews, there's actually 4 chapters in Hebrews that deal with the tabernacle and its functions and everything. So 50 chapters in the Bible are devoted to the tabernacle and its related ministries. So in other words, there's something to this, and there's something that we should know about. And so I think it's profitable for us to do a little bit of a dive into what God's instructions were about making this tabernacle and this place that he would literally dwell in his people, and what its purpose was, the pattern of it, and really what it's pointing to. And that's kind of what we're going to be discussing tonight. So let's first of all talk about some basics tonight, and that is first of all the names of the tabernacle. So it's actually described, there are 5 primary terms that are used for the tabernacle. First is the sanctuary. We just read that in verse 8. "Build me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them," or dwell in them. A sanctuary is denoting that it was set apart for a holy God. So this is important. It's a sanctuary, a sacred spot. So the other verse, and we read that in verse 9, to build a tabernacle. So that's another name of the tabernacle. It's the tabernacle, okay? And it really means, it's revealing that it was the dwelling place of God among his people. So the tabernacle is the dwelling place of God among his people. Okay? I kind of want to make a little bit of a difference later on, and we've talked about it off and on through the years here, about there's a festival called the Feast of Tabernacles, and that is not exactly the same thing. When we're talking about this, we're talking about the primary structure that was, at least in the wilderness wanderings, was in the middle of Israel, okay? But even when they got to the Promised Land, for example, the tabernacles for many, many years in Shiloh, and so that was a place kind of a central location for Israel. But nonetheless, it kind of differentiated. The Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, is really the idea of you living. It's remembering how you lived in the wilderness wanderings in temporary structures, temporary tents and booths and things like that. So that's the difference, okay? Moving on, though, another word for the tabernacle is the word tent. Tent. And the word tent there simply designates it as a temporary dwelling place of God. So it's a temporary dwelling place, which means there's something future that's going to be happening with God and his presence, okay? So another thing to remember that the tabernacle, or this tent, is really a mobile temple. It's a mobile house of God. It's a mobile temple. It was on the move, especially during the wilderness wanderings, okay? Another verse, or another passage we can look at is that the name of the tabernacle is called the Tabernacle of the Congregation, because that is where God met with his people. Look with me in Exodus 29. Exodus 29. I want you to see this verse here. Exodus 29, verse 42. Okay, Exodus 29, verse 42 says, "This shall be a continual burnt offering throughout your generations at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord, where I will meet you and speak there unto thee." And verse 43 is important. "And there I will meet with the children of Israel, and the tabernacle shall be sanctified in my glory." So there he's meeting with Moses, and there he meets with the people. So the tabernacle was not just a sacred space, so not just a tent, a temporary dwelling, but it was a place where God would meet with his people. That's pretty special. It's interesting, in other religions, other pagan worshipers, we had idols and all that. People would go to the idol to commune. Well, here God basically comes to us to meet with us. That's the idea, and that's what's pictured here. Okay, the fifth word that's used is called the Tabernacle of the Testimony. Tabernacle of the Testimony, and later on, if you want to write this down, Exodus 38, verse 21 talks about this. But the Tabernacle of Testimony described the law given to Moses, which was kept in the Ark of the Covenant, which was located in the Holy of Holies. Tabernacle of the Testimony. In other words, it was the tent where God's testimony was, his law, the Ten Commandments. I'm just going to simplify it. Of course, there's more than that, but nonetheless, that's where it was kept, in the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies. So those are the five primary names. When you're reading through Exodus, for example, the last 16 chapters of Exodus, you're going to find these terms that are used, and basically the same thing. So it's important to understand there's a couple different words for that. Okay, let's move on to now the purpose of the tabernacle. What was the purpose of the tabernacle? Okay, let me stopping on my end. Here, let's go this way. There we go. Purpose of the tabernacle was this, okay? So, first of all, for almost 500 years, the tabernacle served as a place for God to dwell among his people, and a place where he could commune with him, okay, where they could commune with him. So, think of that. For 500 years, the tabernacle was in play until Solomon built. Remember, David wanted to build the temple. He couldn't because he was a man of war. And so Solomon, his son, builds the temple, okay? But before then, there was the tabernacle. So for 500 years, it was used. And, of course, it started out at Mount Sinai in the wilderness. But it was a place that served as a place for God to dwell among or in his people, a place where his people would commune with him. And we've just kind of talked about that. Also, we see that the tabernacle was a visual reminder to Israel that they served the living and true God. You think about that. Have no other gods before you. Think of the Ten Commandments, and the important was to have God, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Everything that they had. Well, the children of Israel, especially as they're out in the wilderness, and they're there in their camps, all they had to look was a little bit inward, and they would see this structure, the tabernacle. They would see the cloud, the pillar of cloud. They would see the glory that would come, the smoke from the altar that was there. There was a continual reminder, a visual reminder, that they served not a dead God, not an idol. It was a true and living God. And so that was very, very important. How often, though, Israel forgot that. I guess you get used to your surroundings or whatever, and they forgot that. So another thing, too, about the purpose of the tabernacle, that it was the structure and service of the tabernacle basically showed how sinful people can come before a holy God in worship and in service. And that's really the essence of it. The question that really brings you to mind, okay, God wants to dwell among his people, or in his people. Great. But how can a sinful people worship a God, or worship a true and living God? That's the big question. And so when you understand the tabernacle and the purpose of the tabernacle, it shows us how we can do that. And of course, what was the way that sinful people could come before the tabernacle? Well, you had offers of sacrifices for sin. It was also a place where they received instruction and counsel from the Word of God. So it was a very interactive place. And so this is how, and we will later on in our study, we'll talk about the sacrifices and the priestly duties and a way that the children of Israel could come as sinful people and come before a righteous and holy God. And so very important. But ultimately, the tabernacle, every aspect of the tabernacle pointed to God's redemptive plan. Remember this, and the book of Hebrews illustrates this beautifully about how Jesus is basically the fulfillment of this, but it points to this. So in John chapter 1, verse 14, the Bible talks about that the Word became flesh and did what? Dwelt among us. And we have this idea, well, okay, Jesus came to earth and he's here now, okay? But the word and the imagery that's used there has the connotation that, same this. Let's put it this way. The Word became flesh. Jesus became flesh and tabernacled among us. Is yet just as God made plans for the tabernacle to be in the midst of the camp of Israel, even so when Jesus came to this earth, he came among his people. He came unto his own. His own received or not, but he came unto his own. He tabernacled among them. So all these things that we're going to be discussing in depth on the tabernacle points to really Jesus being the complete picture for us. How can we as a sinful people come before a holy God? Well, we need a priest. We need a great high priest. And that's where Jesus comes in, okay? So it's beautiful. It's really a beautiful picture that we have, okay? So moving on, it says, let's look at the pattern of the tabernacle. So the pattern of the tabernacle. So go with me back to Exodus 25. Go back to Exodus 25. We were there not too long ago. Exodus 25, and let's go back to verse 9 again. Let's reread verse 9. It says, to build me a sanctuary that I would dwell in them. Verse 9, according to all that I showed thee after the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so shall you make it. So what is the pattern of the tabernacle? What things were used for the tabernacle? So, put it this way. In this verse, we see who provided the pattern for the tabernacle, the blueprint, if you will. God did, yeah. So the Lord gave the pattern for the tabernacle. This is his design, okay? And so very, very important. But now let's see, well, what things were used to build the tabernacle? So let's, ever start with a building? You run to Menards or Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever you like to go, okay? You get your building supplies. You guys, do you just like, okay, I think I need this and that, and you get home and what? Oh, you forgot something. You need to go back to the store. How many times do you need to run back to Menards and get everything you need, guys? We've all been there, right? Probably more often than we want to admit. But when we think about this, God's plan of building the tabernacle, nothing was left unchecked. And so let's look at the materials of building the tabernacle. Look with me in Exodus 25, beginning in starting in verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, that they bring me an offering, and this is a heave offering, okay, of every man that giveth it willingly with his heart, ye shall take my offering. Okay, so this offering that they're going to give to the Lord, it's from a willing heart. Okay, in other words, God didn't have to twist their arms. People did this willingly. It's amazing when we get to other things that were donated for the tabernacle later, is like there was like more than enough, and then some. It was just amazing. But here's some of these things in verse 3. And this is the offering which ye shall take of them. Look at these items: gold, silver, brass, and blue and purple, scarlet, and fine linen, and goat's hair, and ram skins dyed red, and badger skins, and shittim wood, oil for the light, spices for anointing oil, and for sweet incense, onyx stones, and stones to be set in the ephod and in the breastplate. So if you look at all these things that are here, pay careful attention, because verses 3 through 7 are really, here are the basic materials that are going to be used for the building and construction of the tabernacle. They didn't have to, I don't think there was a Menards close by and, at Mount Sinai, but nonetheless, this is probably stuff that they brought out of Egypt, to be honest with you, or things that were available as they traveled, depending on certain circumstances. But nonetheless, God brought these materials. So, again, going back, who provided the pattern of the tabernacle? That was the Lord. Well, who provided the materials? The people. All right, the people provided the materials. In other words, it was a joint effort. And so, it's amazing what God can do in and through us, isn't it? And so this is exactly what we have here. So within that, and we see a description here, an artist's rendition of the tabernacle. And so the tabernacle was the focal point of the community of Israel. And we discussed this a couple weeks ago, that out of the 12 tribes, the way that it sat, that the tabernacle sat in the midst. So 3 of the 12 tribes were on each side, north, south, east, and west. And the Levites, those were from the Levites, came the priests, and they formed a ring immediately around the tabernacle. Then 3 of the 12 tribes on each side of the tabernacle. And so, but nonetheless, the tabernacle again was the focal point of the community of Israel. It was the worship center, city hall. Everything was right there in the middle of the camp. So that's important to know. So a couple of things. Okay, if you want to know about dimensions, okay, let me ask you this: what was the measurement standard that was used in the Bible times? Does anybody remember? It begins with a C. Cubit. What is a cubit? How much? Or someone define a cubit. Depends on your arm, right? So basically, it's from your elbow to the tip of your finger. Okay. Generally, it could be 18 inches, unless you're Dave, it could be 86 inches. You know, it's just something like that, all right? So I guess that's how they do it in Kansas City. But it's a different type of math there. Okay, but anyways, generally, you're talking 18 to 20, 22 inches. It depends on that. But let's use the 18-inch perspective on that. So the outer court was 150 feet long, okay? So the outer court was 150 feet long. So, well, now it's going to die on me. There we go. Okay, so this outer court, so this side here, 150 feet. And then this area here was 75 feet, okay, in its width. And then there was a curtain, a linen curtain, that surrounded the outer court that you see here. And it was about 7.5 feet high. 7.5 feet high. So that was the type of curtain. So in addition to that, the linen curtain that surrounded the outer court was held in place by 60 pillars. The 60 pillars you see, for example, here, here, here. And there they are, these pillars were made, they're 60 pillars, and they were spaced 7.5 feet apart. So 7.5 feet apart, and they were made of acacia wood. Acacia wood is the shittim wood that we read about in the Bible that you just read there. Okay, it was native to the Sinai, to the wilderness, and it was covered in bronze and then capped with silver, like a silver capital on top of it. And then there was tied down, and so that's secured. So that was, think of like the fence. That was what held up the curtain. So 60 pillars, 7.5 feet apart, made of acacia wood, covered in bronze, capped with silver. So very important. Now we have the gate. There was an entrance gate here that was literally the door. That was the only entrance, the only way you could access to the tabernacle area, and that was 30 feet wide. Okay, 30 feet wide, and it was located on the east side of the tabernacle. Okay, so going on to explain this a little bit more, let's look at the tabernacle proper now. Tabernacle proper. So this is kind of like the breakdown. Once you get inside in the outer court, you find, of course, the brazen altar, the laver. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to talk more about the dimensions right now. So you have what's called the Mishkan. Mishkan is what is basically the tabernacle proper. That's when we think of the kind of the areas where the priests would enter. Your regular Israelite children of Israel would not enter into that. In fact, there's only select priests, only select people of the tribe of Levi even that could enter into the two areas, one called the holy place, and then the most holy, or the holy of holies. And so the dimensions of this is this. The holy place was 15 feet wide, and get the right one here, and 45 feet long. 15 feet wide, 45 feet long, okay? And then you had in the holy of holy place, it was 15 feet squared, okay? 15 feet high, wide, and long, okay? So 15 feet square. So it was a cube is what it was, okay? So that was the dimensions of that. So it's not a huge facility per se, but in the tabernacle, remember this, it's a mobile house of God, okay? It was very effective, though, in its furnishings and its coverings. So when you think of what the tabernacle would have looked like, I want us to look now at Exodus chapter 26. Go to the next chapter over. And I want us to look at the tabernacle coverings. What covered the tabernacle? So there's actually several layers to this. This is kind of interesting. You've got to remember that this tabernacle needed a lot of protection because they're out in the wilderness. You're dealing with the heat, oppressive heat. You're dealing with winds, sandstorms, things that would have developed during that time. And so you need good protective covering. So there was actually 4 coverings that were given. So in Exodus 26, verses 1 through 14, you have the coverings of the tabernacle. And as you look through that, it says here, actually in verse 1, moreover, thou shalt make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twined linen, blue and purple and scarlet with cherubim, cunning work, thou shalt make them. Okay, and then it talks about the length of everything there. And then later on, verse 7, it says here, and thou shalt make curtains of goat's hair to be a covering upon the tabernacle. 11 curtains thou shalt make, and talks about the length of it. And then moving on to verse... Let's go to verse 12. And the remnant that remained of the curtains of the tent, and half the curtain that remaineth, shall hang over the backside of the tabernacle. Cubit shall be on the side, cubit on the other side that remaineth, the lengths of the curtains of the tent, and shall hang over the sides of the tabernacle on this side. So it basically covered the entire structure is the idea. And then verse 14 says, and thou shalt make coverings of the tent of ram skins dyed red, and a covering above of badger skins. So let me simplify it. There was 4 main coverings. Number 1 was embroidered fine twined linen. That was your first inner layer that was here, okay? All right? And then the next part was goat's hair. Goat's hair. Now, one thing I will say that's interesting about goat's hair is this, that goat's hair is still used today by nomadic Bedouin tribes as basically that is their tent. If you just Google Bedouin tents, and they are made of goat's hair. They actually work as an insulator. In the summertime, it keeps things cool inside the tent, and then also during the wintertime, it keeps things warm. It's a natural insulator used as goat's hair. In the museum that I was the curator of in Tennessee, we had a Bedouin tent. We actually had it imported from the Middle East, and it was made of a goat's hair, and yes, it works great. So I think that's interesting. God designed this perfectly. So you have the embroidered fine twined linen, you had the goat's hair, and then you had ram skin dyed red. Ram skin that was dyed red, okay? And then the next part you see in verse 14, the last covering you would have was called badger skin. Now, there's a little bit of a debate upon this, and this is why. We actually do not know what that Hebrew word means. It's your guess is as good as mine. So badger skin, some say, well, is it a badger? Well, here's an issue. Badgers are not native to that region. That's an issue. The Hebrew word that's used there, it's kind of ambiguous. Even rabbinic scholars do not know what that is. So sometimes you will see an alternate translation as being a dolphin or porpoise skin. And it could be. That's actually possible. Now, hold on for a minute. You're probably thinking, well, what does that make sense? Got to ask a question. Remember, where did the children just come from like 50 days before this? They crossed what? The Red Sea. They're in proximity to the ocean. So, put it that way. The bottom line is this. We do not know 100% what animal skin was used, badger skin or not. There's debate about that. And I don't think we'll know until we get to heaven, actually, on what it is. The badger skin was kind of brought in later. I think even Martin Luther, he kind of introduced it. So that's actually more of a recent translation of it. It's just some of the things that you have to work with the text. Bottom line is, no one knows for sure what type. I actually heard this explanation. I talked to, there's a group that run the Tabernacle in the Wilderness in Timnah Park in southern Israel. And this is their explanation. I actually like it. Whatever animal it was, God provided. God provided for the tabernacle. That sums it up, okay? Could have been a badger that's, from Wisconsin. I actually don't think that works, but, maybe. Could have been a porpoise or a dolphin skin. Could be. By the way, what would be the value of a porpoise or a dolphin skin? It would be what? Waterproof, weatherproof. So, and remember this, the purpose of this was to protect the covering. Regardless, that's the covering, the 4 coverings of that, okay? So, it's interesting. You can kind of wrap your head around that a little bit later, all right? But let's talk about probably something we're a little bit more familiar with now, and that is the furniture of the tabernacle. So let's start back in the outer court. There were 2, and actually this is the tabernacle in Timnah Park. This is where I've actually taken several tour groups there. It's down by the Red Sea. Down near Eilat, and so in the outer court you have two pieces. One is the brazen altar. That is where the sacrifices would occur. That's where the priests would have, you would have brought your sacrifice, your rams, your goats, the bulls, etc. That's where they would have been sacrificed. And then right behind that, next to the door of the Mishkan, is the laver, and that's where the priests would wash and cleanse themselves before going in. So these are two important pieces as you come into the courtyard, okay? And then next you come in to the holy place. The holy place was inside this door. By the way, again, I got to reiterate that the children of Israel, your regular Israelite, did not go in here. Only the priest did. Only the priest did, okay? That's very important to know. Okay, so let's go in there, though. I'll take you in there nonetheless, all right? Thank God for God's grace, okay? So within this, so inside the holy place, and this is what you see if you go down to Timna Park. This is what you would see. And so you have 3 items. You have the table of showbread, you have the golden 7-branch golden lampstand, and in the back is the altar of incense. Okay, and so each of them have a very special feature, a special purpose. Again, I'm just introducing it tonight because in the next couple of weeks, we will go step by step and talk about each one, what they were made of, how were they used, and I think there's going to be some surprising things, like, oh, I didn't realize that type of things. It's really kind of a rich study. So that's the holy place. Now, there was in this, remember, this is 45 feet long, 15 feet wide. And then back here you have the veil, and that brings in you to the what place? Most holy, or the Holy of Holies. So you want to go in there? Now, in the Bible times, there's only one person that could go in there. Who was that? The high priest. Who was the first high priest? Okay, so I'm going to take you in there. My name's Aaron. So couldn't resist. All right, we have to have some fun tonight. Okay, anyways. This is actually a fun study. I love this. So let's go in. I will be your high priest tonight, and I'm going to take you in. Follow behind me carefully, quietly, and we're going to go into the Holy of Holies. Inside the Holy of Holies, remember it's a cube. 15 feet wide, 15 feet high, 15 feet long. And so in here it's a cube, and inside there you have one piece of furniture. Actually, it was made of 2 parts. You have the Ark of the Covenant, and then on top of the Ark of the Covenant, you would have the mercy seat. Okay, they are in the Bible. It's mentioned separately, but nonetheless they're used together. And this is where the high priest would come one time of year. What time of year would the high priest come in to the Holy of Holies? Yom Kippur, which is what? Translation? Day of Atonement. Okay, one time he would offer atonement for his own sins and for the sins of the nation, and he would sprinkle the blood on the mercy seat. Okay, this is where it would happen. Okay, inside the Ark of the Covenant, does anyone know what was inside the Ark of the Covenant? There was 3 items. Okay. Aaron's rod, yes. There was, not showbread, but a pot of manna. And then one other thing. The 10 Commandments. All right, very good. There's a lot of people talking at the same time, which you guys got excited, okay? So that's good. So, but anyways, a very important piece. Very important piece. And by the way, we will do, when we get to that part, we will do a deep dive on where is the Ark of the Covenant today. We're going to put on our fedoras and bullwhips and everything. We're going to be Indiana Jones, okay? We'll even play the Indiana Jones theme song. Okay, anyways. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Okay, so nonetheless, tonight is all introduction. So we have seen, again, the tabernacle. We've seen the dimensions of it. So it's kind of a big place, but it's, when you consider it with, remember the estimation of how many people were there at Mount Sinai when the tabernacle was first constructed. How many of the children of Israel were there? Estimated 2 to 3 million. That's the estimate. Even let's be like really, there's some people say, well, there's not that many. Let's say even if there's 1 million, there is still a lot of people that would surround that place. But again, that was the centerpiece. And so God, let's go back to that verse in chapter 25, verse 8. Build me a sanctuary, a tabernacle, a tent of meeting, a tent of the congregation. Why? Because God would dwell literally in his people, and they give an opportunity for people to commune with God. God is a personal God. This is the point of the tabernacle. He's not a distant God like, I hope you hear us, God. No, he's a very personal God who wants to be with his people and in his people and have that personal relationship. And then the big question, like I said, is how can we as sinful people come before a holy God? God will provide a way for that. There's a lot of details and a lot of things as you read. If you read the last 16 chapters of Exodus, you're going to read all the ins and outs of what went into the tabernacle. We're going to be going through that over the next couple of weeks. But I challenge you is this, that don't get overwhelmed because there's so many good things. We're going to take it step by step by baby step, but we're going to see the beauty of the tabernacle and how everything, it points to one main picture, and that's Jesus himself. And that's something we can rejoice in. So build me a sanctuary that I may dwell in them. What a blessing. All right. Benjamin, we can go ahead and cut the...